Last March, I had just moved to Portland and needed a bike to get to work. Being new in town, I didn't have much money, so I decided to look for something used on Craigslist. I found this perfect vintage bike for only $150. The price was too good to be true, but the photo looked amazing. The seller's name was Marcus. Through messages, he seemed very friendly and professional. He told me the bike had belonged to his wife, but she didn't use it anymore. We agreed to meet the next day at 7 in the evening at his house. I arrived on time at the address he had given me. It was a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood with a well-maintained garden. Everything seemed normal. Marcus greeted me at the front door with a smile. He was a man in his 40s, tall and thin. He told me the bike was in the basement because he didn't want it to get wet from the rain. We went down some wooden stairs that creaked with each step. The basement was well lit and organized, with several bikes hanging on the walls. He showed me the one he was selling, and it looked exactly like in the photo. While I was checking it out, I heard the basement door close upstairs. I asked Marcus about the noise, but he acted like he hadn't heard anything. I kept inspecting the bike, but something didn't feel right. I told him I wanted to take it upstairs to see it better in natural light. When I tried to go up the stairs, the door was locked. Marcus told me very calmly not to worry, that sometimes the door got stuck. He tried to open it from below, but couldn't. Then he suggested we relax and wait a moment. He pulled out a folding chair and invited me to sit down. That's when I noticed there was a small bed in a corner of the basement, half hidden behind the bikes. I also saw there were canned foods stacked on a shelf. My heart started beating very fast. Marcus noticed I was nervous and asked if I wanted something to drink. He went toward a small refrigerator I hadn't seen before. At that moment, I ran toward the stairs and started pounding on the door, screaming for help. I heard Marcus coming up the stairs behind me. I managed to find a small window near the ceiling. It was very narrow, but I managed to break the glass with a tool I found. I squeezed through even though I cut my arms. I ran into the street screaming. A neighbor helped me and called the police. When they arrived, Marcus had disappeared. The officers found that the house had been empty for months. Marcus had been using the abandoned property to lure victims. I never used Craigslist to buy anything again. I still have nightmares about that basement.
2 years ago, I was living in a studio apartment in Chicago. I had just bought a used refrigerator off Craigslist, but it wasn't working properly. The freezer would defrost randomly, and I was losing food every week. I couldn't afford to buy a new one, so I decided to find someone who could repair it. I posted an ad on Craigslist looking for appliance repair, and this guy named Danny contacted me within an hour. His rates were really cheap, almost too cheap, but I was broke, so I didn't question it. He said he could come by that evening around 9 o'clock since he worked day shifts elsewhere. Danny showed up right on time. He was a thin guy in his 30s, wearing a stained work uniform. Right away, something felt off about him. He kept asking weird questions while he worked, like if I lived alone, what my work schedule was, and if I had any roommates coming by. I tried to stay busy while he worked, but he kept calling me over to look at what he was doing. Every time I came close, he would stare at me for a few seconds too long before going back to the refrigerator. He also kept checking his phone and looking toward my windows, like he was waiting for something. The repair took way longer than it should have. What should have been a 30-minute job stretched to almost 2 hours. He kept saying he needed to test different parts and that these old models were tricky. During this time, he asked to use my bathroom twice, and both times I heard him moving around more than necessary. When he finally finished, I paid him and walked him to the door. As he left, he said something that made my blood run cold. He told me he might need to come back tomorrow night to check on his work and that I should leave my back door unlocked because he might arrive late and didn't want to wake me up. I told him that wasn't necessary and that the front door would be fine if he needed to return. He insisted that the back door would be easier and kept pushing the issue. I firmly said no and locked the door behind him. That night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of someone trying to force my back door open. I could hear the metal scraping against the frame. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the kitchen to listen. Through the thin door, I could hear Danny's voice whispering to someone else. He was saying things like, "He's definitely alone," and "the layout is just like I said." That's when I realized he hadn't been testing refrigerator parts for 2 hours. He had been memorizing my apartment and planning something. I called the police immediately and hid in my bedroom closet. The sounds at the back door stopped, but I could hear footsteps moving around the outside of my building. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, but Danny and whoever was with them had already left. The officers found scratches and pry marks all around my back door frame. They also discovered that Danny had given me a fake name and phone number. The business card he left had a disconnected number on it. I moved out of that apartment the next month. I never found out what Danny's real plan was, but I'm grateful I didn't leave that door unlocked like he wanted. Some repair jobs just aren't worth the discount.
Last summer, I decided to sell an antique mirror that had been in my family for years. It was beautiful, but way too big for my small apartment in Denver. I posted it on Craigslist for $300, which was actually pretty reasonable considering its age and condition. I got several responses, but one person stood out. A woman named Sarah messaged me saying she collected vintage mirrors and was very interested in mine. She asked a lot of detailed questions about its history and seemed genuinely knowledgeable. We arranged to meet the next evening at 6 o'clock. Sarah showed up exactly on time driving a clean white sedan. She looked like a normal woman in her 50s, well-dressed and polite. She examined the mirror carefully and seemed impressed by its craftsmanship. She said she definitely wanted to buy it, but had forgotten her checkbook at home. She asked if I could follow her to her house so she could get the money and pick up the mirror at the same time. Her house was only about 15 minutes away, she said, and she had a truck there that would be better for transporting such a large piece. Something felt a little off about the request, but she seemed harmless enough, and I really wanted to sell the mirror. I agreed to follow her. We got in our cars, and I followed her white sedan as we left my neighborhood. The drive started normally, but after about 10 minutes, I noticed we were heading toward a pretty isolated area outside the city. The houses became more spread out, and there were long stretches of empty road between them. I started to feel uncomfortable, but decided to trust my initial judgment about Sarah. After about 20 minutes of driving, she pulled into the driveway of a house that looked abandoned. The windows were boarded up, and the yard was completely overgrown with weeds. I stayed in my car and honked my horn, thinking maybe she had made a mistake. Sarah got out of her car and walked back to mine. She knocked on my window and told me she was house-sitting for a friend who was renovating the place. She said her truck was parked behind the house and asked me to pull around back. Every instinct I had was telling me to leave, but I was already there, and turning around seemed more awkward than just getting this over with. I drove around to the back of the house, and that's when I saw there was no truck, just an empty, overgrown backyard. Sarah appeared at my driver's side window again, but this time her demeanor was completely different. She wasn't smiling anymore, and she had something in her hand that I couldn't quite see. She told me to get out of the car. I immediately put the car in reverse and started backing up as fast as I could. Sarah ran after my car, shouting something I couldn't understand. I spun around in the driveway and sped back toward the main road. I drove straight to the nearest police station and reported what had happened. They took down all the information, but when they went to check the abandoned house, no one was there. The white sedan was gone too. The phone number Sarah had used to contact me was disconnected when the police tried to call it. They told me these kinds of setups were becoming more common, where criminals would lure sellers to remote locations under the pretense of large purchases. I never sold that mirror. It's still leaning against my bedroom wall, and every time I look at it, I remember how close I came to walking into whatever Sarah had planned for me in that abandoned house.
During my junior year at college in Austin, I was struggling to pay rent on my 2-bedroom apartment near campus. My previous roommate had graduated early, leaving me with the full rent burden. I posted an ad on Craigslist looking for someone to take over the lease for the remaining 4 months of the school year. I got several responses, but one guy named Tyler seemed perfect. He was clean, quiet, had good references, and could pay the deposit immediately. When he came to see the apartment, everything went smoothly. He was polite, asked reasonable questions, and seemed genuinely interested in the place. Tyler was around my age, maybe a year or two older, and said he was taking some classes at the community college while working part-time. He dressed well and spoke intelligently about his career goals. After he left, I felt confident that I had found a good roommate. That evening, I was watching the local news while eating dinner. They were covering a story about a recent string of break-ins near the university area. The reporter mentioned that police were looking for a suspect who had been targeting student housing by posing as a potential renter to Case Apartments. When they showed the police sketch on screen, my blood went cold. The drawing looked exactly like Tyler. Same facial structure, same hair, even the same general build. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence, that the sketch was pretty generic and could match lots of people. But the more I thought about it, the more details started bothering me. Tyler had spent a lot of time looking around the apartment, asking about windows, door locks, and whether I had any expensive electronics. He also asked weird questions about my schedule and whether I often had friends over. I decided to call the police tip line just to be safe. I gave Tyler's contact information and described our meeting. The officer who took my call seemed very interested and asked me to come in the next day to look at some photos. At the police station, they showed me several mugshots, and Tyler's face was right there among them. His real name was Michael Chen, and he had been arrested multiple times for burglary and identity theft. The officer explained that he would scout potential targets by responding to roommate ads, then return later to rob the apartments when he knew the residents' schedules. They told me that Tyler, or Michael, had used at least 6 different fake identities in the past 2 months. The phone number he had given me was traced to a prepaid cell phone that had been purchased with cash. What made it even more disturbing was that they found evidence he had been breaking into apartments he had previously visited as a fake roommate prospect. In some cases, he would even move small items around or leave subtle signs that he had been there, apparently enjoying the psychological aspect of violating people's personal space. The police arrested him 2 days later at another apartment viewing across town. When they searched his car, they found detailed notes about dozens of apartments he had visited, including mine. He had written down information about my class schedule, my laptop, my TV, and even which window would be easiest to break. I never did find a roommate for those last 4 months. I picked up extra shifts at my campus job and ate ramen noodles most nights, but it was worth it for the peace of mind. Sometimes, saving money isn't worth the risk of letting a stranger into your life.
Last fall, my grandmother passed away and left me her house in Seattle. While going through her belongings, I found an incredible collection of vintage jewelry that I knew was worth quite a bit of money. Since I was planning to sell the house anyway, I decided to sell some of the more valuable pieces to help with moving expenses. I posted several items on Craigslist, including a beautiful Art Deco necklace from the 1920s. Within hours, I received a message from someone named Alina who said she was a serious collector and was very interested in seeing the entire collection. She offered to pay cash and asked if she could come by that weekend. Alina seemed knowledgeable about vintage jewelry in our email exchanges. She used proper terminology and asked intelligent questions about the piece's provenance and condition. I agreed to let her come to the house on Saturday afternoon to look at what I had. When Saturday came, Alina arrived with 2 other women. She introduced them as her daughter Lisa and her friend Maria, saying they also collected vintage items and helped her evaluate purchases. They seemed friendly enough, though they spent a lot of time looking around the house and asking questions about whether I lived alone. Alina was genuinely interested in the jewelry and made fair offers on several pieces. However, I noticed that while she was examining the necklaces and bracelets, Lisa and Maria kept wandering around the house. They would disappear into other rooms and take a long time to come back. When I went to the kitchen to get everyone some water, I caught Maria photographing the contents of my grandmother's china cabinet with her phone. When I asked what she was doing, she claimed she was just admiring the beautiful dishes and wanted to show her mother, who also collected antiques. Something about the situation started making me uncomfortable, but Alina was offering good money for several pieces, and I really needed the cash. We continued looking at jewelry for another hour, with Alina ultimately deciding to purchase 3 necklaces for $800 total. As they were preparing to leave, Alina asked if I had more jewelry that I hadn't shown them yet. I mentioned that there were a few more pieces upstairs that I wasn't sure about selling. Lisa immediately offered to help me bring them down, saying she had a good eye for determining value. That's when I noticed that Maria had been taking notes in a small notebook the entire time. She had written down details about the layout of the house, the location of valuables, and even notes about the locks on the doors and windows. When she saw me looking at her notebook, she quickly closed it and put it away. I told them I had changed my mind about selling any more pieces and that they should take what they had already purchased and leave. Alina tried to convince me to reconsider, becoming more insistent than she had been before. Lisa suggested they could come back another day when I had more time to think about it. After they left, I called my neighbor who had been friends with my grandmother for years. I described the 3 women to her, and she told me she had seen them driving slowly through the neighborhood several times over the past week, always in the same car, always seeming to be looking at different houses. 2 nights later, I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of someone trying to force open the back door. I could hear at least 2 people talking quietly outside. One voice sounded like Alina's. I grabbed my phone and called the police while hiding in the upstairs bedroom. The sounds outside stopped before the police arrived, but they found clear evidence that someone had tried to pry open both the back door and a downstairs window. They also discovered that the same car my neighbor had described was parked 2 blocks away with 3 women inside. When the police approached the car, the women drove off quickly, but not before the officers got the license plate number. It turned out the car was registered to someone with multiple arrests for home invasion and theft. The 3 women had been running a scheme where they would respond to online sales ads, case houses during legitimate purchases, then return later to steal everything else. I sold the house within 2 weeks and moved back to my apartment in the city. I never finished going through all of my grandmother's belongings, but at least I know none of it ended up in Alina's hands. Some family heirlooms are worth more than the money you can get for them.